Good afternoon and welcome at today's Masterclass. My name is Lisanne and I will be your host for the upcoming 45 minutes. Today's Masterclass we will be talking about resilience in times of distress. A topic that wasn't on our agenda originally, but we really felt that we need to put on there. Not only because of the fact that there were a lot of clients in consultations asking for ways to cope with their thoughts and feeling due to the situation that the world is in right now and the war in Ukraine. But not only those consultations pointed it out to us, also a little research that we did amongst 500 Dutchmen pointed out that almost 1/3 of the people is really facing stress, having worries and is anxious due to the situation in the world right now. And slightly less people are also facing a lot of troubles being productive during their working day or having troubles focusing. So for us, it was really, not an eye-opener, but we really wanted to help people guiding you through these stressful times, the stressful times that we are in right now, but also stressful times that maybe are coming up into your life, like later on. One thing that I also really want to point out, if there is something that you really want to talk about, know that our psychologists are always there for you to help. We will be here guiding you through in this masterclass, but also apart from the masterclass, you can always book a consultation and our psychologists will be there for you. And then I want to introduce today's speakers for you. Psychologists Jochem, Bukman and Eva Rüger will guide you through these presentations. They will tell you what resilience actually is and what you can learn to be more resilient in life. I hope you get the insights that you really need out of this masterclass. And I wish you happy learning.
Hello, I'm Eva and I will be guiding you through the first part of this masterclass. And today we'll be talking about what resilience is, why it is important, especially in times of distress, and of course, some tips on how to boost your resilience. And to start off, I'd like to ask your first question. What comes to your mind when you think of resilience? Maybe some words come to mind, or you think of a specific person that you think is very resilient, or you think of a situation where we really need to be resilient. You can stop this video for a while and make some notes if you want to and think about your answer to this question. When I think about resilience, I really like to think of a tree and especially of what it does when there's a storm. When there's a really heavy storm with a strong wind blowing and rain, a tree bends. It adjusts, and once the storm is over, it readjusts and it bounces back into shape. And that's what nature does. We all know that nature is really resilient and recovers from a lot of crises and catastrophes. And sometimes we forget that we as humans are also very resilient. We recover from a lot of difficult situations. And to remind us all of how resilient we already are and to give us some input on how to be even more resilient, we give this masterclass today. So we'll of course talk about what resilience is, and then we'll especially go into the mental aspect of resilience. This includes why we should deal with challenging emotions, how we can do that, and also how we can build positive emotions, and why we should do that. And in the end, there will be a live Q&A. And to talk more about resilience, we first talk about times of distress. As Lisanne already mentioned, we give this masterclass in a time where there's a war in Ukraine, where a lot of people have to flee their home country, leaving everything behind. And there are people all over the world worrying about the situation in their country, about their friends and family. But what we talk about today also applies to stressful times, to adverse events that happen to each and every one of us throughout our life. Think of a breakup or the loss of a loved one, or stressful time at work or at home. Or think of the pandemic that we all went through and are still going through with all its restrictions. And all these difficult times and challenging events impact our lives in several ways. They impact our lives practically and physically, restricting or changing our opportunities to carry out tasks and activities. They also impact our social life, the way and the amount we can connect with the people around us. And they impact us emotionally, and they impact our emotional well-being. And I'd like to talk about this emotional reaction to adverse events a bit. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and who wrote several books about the meaning of life and about human suffering and human reaction to adversity, said, "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior." And what that means is that any type of emotional reaction to a difficult event is normal. And we sometimes forget that. Nowadays, where mental health and resilience are often associated with the word strong, and where an always positive mindset is portrayed as the ideal, we sometimes forget that suffering is also part of life. And negative emotions, challenging emotions in the face of adversity are normal. So what does that mean for resilience? Resilience means the capacity to quickly recover from difficult situations. It does not mean not being emotionally impacted by adverse events. When you think back of the image of a tree that I just talked about, it's not like the tree is not affected by the storm, like it stands strong. It still gets wet and it may also lose a few leaves, but then it recovers from the storm. And that's what resilience is. Resilience is also an ability that each and every one of us can learn and train and develop further. And it is not, and that's good news, a personality trait that we are either born with or without, that we either possess or we don't. So each and every one of us can learn how to be more resilient. And this means that this masterclass is relevant if you're currently going through a tough time. But it also counts for everyone who wants to learn how to boost their resilience. When we talk about resilience, we talk about 4 pillars, so 4 aspects that make up resilience. The first one being the physical one, and this refers to our physical body, to our physical well-being. And most of us have an idea of how to build up a strong body, a strong immune system by eating well, by doing physical activity, by avoiding unhealthy habits and sustaining healthy behavior. And that's one aspect of being resilient. Then we have 2 more pillars, the social one and meaning. The social one referring to our social network, our social support system. And we can build that by prioritizing relationships that give us empathy and understanding, and that support us in tough times. With meaning, it refers to experiencing a direction in your life and experiencing meaning in what you do. You can build that up by getting to know your own values, what is important to you personally, knowing your beliefs and your principles, and by adhering to them. And finally, there's the mental aspect of resilience, the mental pillar. And this refers to your psychological, to your mental health, to your needs, to your feelings, thoughts, emotions. And you can build that up by learning how to deal with your emotions, by focusing on what you personally need, and by practicing gratitude, focusing on the positive in your life. And well, we as psychologists at Open Up, we naturally know and hear most about the mental aspect of resilience, which is also why this is what we'll be focusing on today. Taken together, resilience includes taking care of your physical and your mental health and of your social connections. This involves also dealing with thoughts and feelings. And it requires trust in yourself and your ability to cope. And again, it is something that everyone can learn and develop. And before talking a bit more about the mental pillar of resilience, I'd like to ask you another question. How do you take care of your mental health in stressful times? Most of us have an idea about how to take care of the physical body. We have an idea of what's healthy nutrition, physical activity, of healthy habits. And it can also be quite intuitive how to take care of your social connections. But taking care of your mental health can be tricky, especially in the face of adversity. Taking care of your own needs and your mental well-being. So I'd like to invite you to think about this question. Again, feel free to pause this video for a second and note down your answers. Now going into depth a bit about this mental pillar, especially about the question why we should actually care about dealing with negative emotions. Because we just heard that negative emotions are a normal reaction, so it is normal in the face of adversity to feel anger, to feel sadness, to feel maybe guilt, but those are not necessarily nice to feel, so why should we bother dealing with them? And I'm talking about negative emotions here, not because those emotions are useless or not helpful, not at all, but because most of us agree that they're not necessarily nice to feel. But we'll go more into that later on. And part of the answer to the questions why we should deal with negative emotions is when we look at what happens if we don't. So a lot of people suppress negative emotions when they come up. And this has several reasons. Maybe they learned early in their life that some emotions are just not acceptable, or they worry about what happens to the people around them when they show these emotions. What do people think of me or feel when they see I'm sad or when they see that I'm really angry? So a natural or understandable reaction is to suppress these emotions. But that costs a lot of energy and a lot of attention. We like to make this more visual by using the image of pressing a water ball underwater. And what it naturally wants to do is to come back up, so it pushes back up. And the deeper we press and the more attention, energy we consume by pressing it underwater, the more it wants to come up, which also shows that negative emotions tends to pile up when they are suppressed. And in the end of the day, when for a second we forget to put our attention and energy on suppressing the emotion, on pushing this water ball underwater, as it pops up. So the emotion is probably still going to be there. So what can we do instead? We could turn towards the emotion, stop suppressing it. Imagine all the energy you can save when you just leave this beach ball next to you on the surface of the water instead of pushing it underwater. This gives us a better balance of our energy, of our well-being in life. It also, clears up much more space to enjoy things around us that are good. And it also gives us space to help the people around us that really need it. One more thing is it gives you back a feeling of control. So when an emotion feels very overwhelming, it can feel like it consumes us and all our energy is requested by this emotion. And once you start accepting it and just letting it be there, you take back charge over your own energy and your well-being. This concept of letting the emotion be there and accepting it sounds very nice, but it can be quite tricky in practice, especially in stressful times when a lot of those emotions come together. And we, of course, want to tell you also more about how you can do that, how acceptance works, and give you practical tips. And that's what my colleague Jochem will do now in the second part of this masterclass.
Yes, thank you, Eva. Because indeed, acceptance sounds great, but it's much harder to actually bring in practice. And that's also what we're finding with the clients that we're seeing every day, in fact, for me even this morning. And to dive a little bit more into that and how to sort of more practically get a better understanding and how to actually deal with these negative emotions as they're happening. I'd like to kick that off with that first question here. So, how do you deal with challenging emotions? Like Eva said, you can pause the video, but you can also feel free to share this in the chat. Of course, as it's we're called Open Up for a reason, so we always like to invite people to open up themselves as well. Because I think the most important thing there this is a very personal question, and it's usually also a very personal occasion in what way you choose to deal with that. So what I don't want to do is give a story on how to perfectly deal with all the emotions you are experiencing, because the way that comes natural to you is usually the best way. But what I do want to do is give some different insights on how to deal with that. So what happens often is that people don't come in with a very specific, this is the type of emotion that I'm dealing with, right? It's usually stuff like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't know I don't know. I have no clue what to do next. I'm just working, or I'm feeling very exhausted. So the first thing that at that point that we're trying to do, and maybe this helps you as well, is to look into actually identifying the different emotions that we're having, right? So taking, for instance, a couple of years ago, I was fairly unceremoniously fired from my previous job, at which point there's a lot coming at you, right? There's different thoughts, there's different emotions happening, and at this point, it was helpful to me to sit still for a minute and start thinking about, so what am I actually feeling at this point? To look into that complex overlay, right? So maybe it starts off with sort of a sense of, I feel betrayed, because that's definitely something I can recall feeling at that moment. But usually underneath that, there's this feeling of being let down, and definitely connected back to anger. So what we're seeing here is something that we'd like to call a wheel of emotions, and there's plenty of examples of this to be found on the internet. And sometimes it's already helpful to just take a look at that and see if you can identify which different emotions you are experiencing at any given time. Definitely something we're doing in practice, and definitely something you could be doing on your own as well, just to give it a name, because usually that's already the first step into dealing with it in a more effective manner. So to zoom a little bit more into it, we're just going to pick out a few of the common difficult emotions that we're dealing with, and to look into those a little bit more in depth. So like I mentioned, we're starting off with anger here, right? And this could be, anger is something that's very interesting, right? Because it happens quite often, but I feel like, especially in more business-like settings, it's something that's very unaccepted, where it definitely serves a very interesting purpose, right? Like we're saying here, right? It has a function. It's usually to protect your vulnerability, and usually when you are angry, you have at least a perception that this is being threatened. And it's also usually emotion that, from the sort of origin, something that really entices us to step forward, to take something into action, and that's what we're finding when people have a lot of anger bottled up without it going anywhere. So what we'd like to do is, when somebody's angry, to see if we can actually use that energy, because it's an approach energy. It's something that you want to do something with. And maybe the main reason that you're feeling angry, sort of, for instance, this is also something that of course happens when, for instance, you lose a loved one, or maybe you have actually people sitting in the Ukraine right now. Maybe you can't actually do something about that, but you could actually look at the other things that are happening in your life and use that energy in a way that's helpful to you. So that's also the tip there, to go for a more problem-focused approach, to see if you can actually make a little bit of an overview. Take that time to make an overview of the list of the issues that you're dealing with that may be connected to your anger, or may just be happening to you, because it could be useful to put that sort of into it. So usually that works in a way that you're listing that, you're choosing one of the ones that you actually want to tackle first. Great question to ask yourself there is, which one of these things is causing me most harm, so what I want to focus on. Define that a little bit more, brainstorm alternatives, stuff that you could do about that, choose whatever strategy may work for you, formulate that, and see if you can actually get that more into practice, because usually this is one of these emotions that entices us to move forward, and maybe that's something that we can listen to at that point. Going from anger to a much less of an approach tendency to more of an avoidant tendency, we're of course talking about sadness and also anxiety. A very natural reaction to bad things happening around us, right? Is often connected to grief and loss. And this is also something that's happening when we're talking to people that are in transition, right? They know they're going to lose their job, for instance, or they know that they're, for instance, when they're very ill, that some of their mobility may be compromised. And then sadness is coming up. And I think the biggest thing there, connecting back to what Viktor Frankl said in the quote at the beginning here, if you're experiencing that, this is a very natural response, right? It is a signal for help. It's when we're, whenever we are feeling vulnerable and we're having some sadness connected to that, yeah, it's probably part of it. Similarly to anxiety there, which usually helps us to plan and to make sure that this doesn't happen again. When it comes to more practical tips on that, to really focus on, so how can I become a bit more comfortable? Because usually there's a sense of diminished safety there. So see if you can get some more self-care happening there and see if you can find some more comfort. And then a big one, especially if there is some sadness there or maybe some grief or maybe postponed grief, as we like to call it, it could help to actually write a letter to the person or the thing that you're feeling the sadness about, just to give that some sort of a form or shape and not to be walking around with it in your head or in your heart the whole day. Which brings us to the last emotion that we're going into in a bit more depth, or the last unhelpful emotion there, which is despair and hopelessness. And whereas the other ones are very much part of the natural scope of emotions we're all experiencing, this one is very much a natural one as well. But it is maybe the one that we would like to emphasize there. This is not something you have to walk around with, right? As we're saying, it's a major signal of profound wrongness. If you're having that sensation of not being able to get off the couch, not being able to concentrate for extended period of time, this is probably your body or your subconscious trying to signal you, all right, something needs to change. And I think at this point it's really important to look into what kind of information intake are we looking at. We've seen this on numerous media outlets, and this is actually one the article that we launched ourselves as well, is to really make sure that you're not getting too much information on a daily basis on stuff that you can't actually do anything about, because that tends to increase that sense of hopelessness. And to be mindful of the fact that we have a bias, a mistake in the way that we can think that leans towards negativity. So if we only get negative news in or negative information in, we tend to become more hopeless. So I think it's important to realize that and to deal with that. Again, here it's very important to check those support systems, whatever you have in place. It is usually better to have a talk about that. See if you can focus on what is going well, on the strengths that you do have, and see if you can switch that perspective to an opportunity for growth by something that we've used before, the circle of influence here by Covey, is to see, even though you are concerned about this, see where you can actually influence that, see what stuff you can do that actually may help you out in a very practical manner, so you can influence that sense of control over that, because that's usually the polar opposite of hopelessness. And is definitely something that we're trying to emphasize there. Again, not something that you should get off, not that we're trying to say that you need to get off your couch and start doing everything right now. We do want to emphasize that this is probably a signal that you could need some more help, so see if you can mobilize that. And one way that I tend to deal with that as a psychologist, but also as a person, is something that I can borrowed here from Yuval Noah Harari, author of *Sapiens*, Homo Deus. He tends to meditate a lot, I think half an hour at least every morning. And one of the things that he does, and this is of course not something that he made up, it's just got to credit where credit is due, is that he tries to invite emotions. And I'll try to explain that by using a personal example of mine, just to make this a bit more light. This was about me not passing my motor theory exam multiple occasions, not going to say how often, but quite often. And what happened, one of the last times that I was doing that, I was actually feeling a bit overwhelmed as well. I was having a stressful day, failed the exam, had to move on. And what I tried to do there is to take a couple of minutes to stand still with that. So what I tried to do is take a bit of a deeper breath. I isolated myself for a couple of minutes, went into a quiet space, took a few breaths, tried to find at least some sense of calm, and then I tried to invite emotions over. So what I try to do there is sort of tell myself, all right, so what is happening right now, right? I'm feeling some anger, right? Because I felt at that moment that, of course, the grading system was unfair. So, all right, so the grading system is unfair. What else? well, I'm also angry because I studied really hard and I failed again. So what else? And at some point, something came up, like I actually want to still pass this. I have to make sure I'll do this. All right, so there's that. Similarly for this, when it comes to sadness, because of course I felt sad because I failed again. Is there anything I want to do with that? No, I just feel sad. All right, that's okay. So what we're trying to do there is listen without judgment. And what I also try to do there, if we're doing this also with less intense emotions, is to set boundaries on that. So inviting your emotions over and tell them, all right, so what do you have to tell me? All of it is welcome, but after I'm done giving you this attention, I want to move on with my day and refocus on the things that I want to be doing. And if it then comes back up again, try to delay that to the next moment when you're doing your inviting emotion session, so you can actually listen again. A little practice that seems to be working out for a lot of people there. Which brings us to the actual last part here, because we did want to touch on positive emotions as well. If you're listening to more than, if this is not the first of our masterclass that you've been listening to, you're going to recognize this part. But we did wanted to refer back to actually positive psychology, right? Because if this is the first time, positive psychology is the direction in psychology, which is concerned also about being able to not just talk about people who are suffering, but also talking about how can we actually increase that human experience. And what we've seen here is the PERMA model, the 5 components which are intrinsically linked to well-being. And I'm mentioning it here because there's a lot of studies that are showing that higher well-being also is connected to higher resilience. So when it comes to what can you actually do outside of the times of distress, is see if you can build upon your sense of well-being also as a manner to be more resilient whenever, as in the example of Eva, the storm hits, right? And of course, it leads to more happiness as well. So what we're focusing here on is especially the positive emotions, so that first one here. If you want to check out the other ones, we do invite you to look into the work of Seligman or one of our other previous masterclasses. And ways to build upon positive emotions so you can be more resilient in that matter is actually to work with something that we'd like to call a white book, in which you write down every day positive things that are happening to you. And then also write down if you can connect it to a quality. So for instance, if you brought somebody a coffee during work today and they thank you for that, and maybe you're a helpful person. You don't actually have to believe that yet, but it is connected to that. And that's a way to actually experience sort of, or make that connection to our positive things are happening as well. Another way is to practice gratitude, which is commonplace. Probably not the first time you've heard of this, but something that has been proven over and over again to build positive emotions effectively is to do any type of ritual on a daily basis where you're practicing gratitude, something you're thankful for. Of course, doing stuff that you like, being able to focus on stuff you love as well as doing the stuff that you need to do. And connecting back to the inviting emotion part I just talked about, to be able to observe and acknowledge those are the positive things that are happening in your life. So to sum things up, some key takeaways there. As Eva mentioned, to know that suffering is part of life. Experiencing negative emotions is not a bad sign at all. It is just a sign that your system is working in order, right? See if you can choose where to focus your attention after you acknowledge these emotions, and see if you can ask yourself, what I'm doing right now, is this helping me or is this harming me? And to go into sort of a more takeaway thing is, what can you actually do to build more resilience in your life right now? Would that be a physical part? Maybe you want to exercise a bit more to become more physically resilient. See if you can help out with the social part and get some support out there. See if there is actually meaning you can connect to the stuff that you're experiencing. And lastly, of course, the mental part, what we've been talking about this entire masterclass. And as Lisanne said in the beginning, we are of course here for you as well. If you feel the need to talk about this a little further, of course we can. Feel free to share this again as well. At which point I'd like to say thank you for listening to this point. We're going to continue this in the Q&A right here on the couch. See you in a minute.
Well, Eva and Jochem, thank you for this interesting presentation on resilience. I really liked, actually, in the very, very beginning, you mentioned this metaphor about the tree. And for me, it immediately started living, this topic. I saw this tree like bending in the storm, but then, you know, and that it's okay. It's okay to bend and to wave and to have difficulty to stay up. But then when the storm's over, you'll be okay again. So for me, yeah, the topic immediately, I felt it a bit, yeah. And if you have any questions at home, feel free to, of course, ask them in the chat. It's on the right side of your screen, and then we will go over it here right now with Jochem and Eva. And I actually saw an interesting comment in the chat already before we entered this live Q&A. And someone said, like, I find I need to be preventative rather than reactive. So in a preventive manner, she tries to have healthy habits such as meditation or journaling, but then he or she is struggling to keep calm in stressful situation. Is that normal?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's also one of the points that we're trying to make with this talk, that sort of if you're feeling stressed in stressful time, good, you should probably, right? This is your system working along with you. And I think it's great that she's already doing these preventative care things, but it doesn't mean it's not gonna touch you, right? And I think I like that about what Eva was talking about in the beginning as well. We have that image that it means that you're strong, that it doesn't hurt you at all, but it's okay if you bend along a little bit.
You're human.
Yeah, exactly. You're human. So no, I think that's exactly it, right? And what we talked about in previous masterclasses as well, our perception of stress is very important because it's not necessarily a bad thing. So if you're feeling stressed or you're feeling overwhelmed when everything is on fire around you, yeah, it's probably good. Take some time to deal with that.
Yeah, cool. And maybe is there like a quick tip that if you're feeling stressed right now, is there a quick tip, a breathing exercise, whatever, that you can immediately do to feel better?
Well, I really like to do belly breathing then. Like really just take a few breaths and feel those, because then you're not in your head anymore and with a stressful situation, but you really can feel your breath and focus on that. And that really helps me when I'm stressed. And it only takes 2 minutes.
Yeah. Jochem, do you also have a quick tip?
What I'm finding when I'm really stressed is, for me, it's really hard to sort of calm down my brain because it sort of keeps on pumping in fresh sort of thoughts and associations. So to me, I think we've had this before, but it's the 4-7-8. It's on the website as well, but it basically means that you're counting in the seconds that you're breathing in, that you're holding your breath and you're exhaling again. And for me, actually, counting along with my breath as I'm doing this 4 rotations, something like that. So it's also like a minute or two. It's something that really helps me settle down a bit more and then get refocused on, so what should I actually be doing now? So that's breathing. The quickest one. Yeah.
Just watch your breath.
Yeah.
Another question from the chat. It's, can you explain the impact of activities that promote escapism on stress and resilience?
It's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one.
Let's see if I can get that straight. Activities that promote escapism.
Yeah, so I guess what this person is trying to say is the impact of when you don't do stuff to better your resilience.
So when you don't deal with your reaction, basically.
When you try to escape it.
Yourself, yeah, I think it's maybe then you're not suppressing actively or putting energy into not feeling the emotion, but the emotion is still going to be there, right? So that's why we talked about to make space for what you're actually feeling, and that distracting yourself for a while is also fine, right? It's okay to have a break. And what we wanted to point out, I think, is that you also have to make some space for what you're feeling and acknowledge that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the most important thing there, because I think the reason that most of us are not doing that on a daily basis because it doesn't feel nice to be dealing with these negative emotions, right? Initially, you're going to feel the anxiety or the sadness or the anger. You're going to feel it more as you're putting that focus on it. And also sort of to escape that, to distract yourself usually feels better because it's the absence of that negative emotion all of a sudden. But usually the fear of facing the emotion is bigger than the actual impact itself. So I think whenever we are actually giving space to that, we can easily find, so this is not actually harming me, right? And on the long term, like when you're continuously suppressing these emotions, it can actually harm you. Sometimes even in a physical way, but definitely on a mental and emotional way, right? You become sort of less emotionally present, and then you're feeling much less of the richness of what life has to offer you. So on the short term, escapism may be a very good one, but on the long term, usually it isn't. And yeah, I think it is. I think it is interesting to at least practice it every now and then. But like you said as well, like what some people are coming in, so I want to deal with this every day, all day, and I like to sort of also emphasize: take your time to deal with it, but also take your time to not deal with it.
Yeah.
You do whatever you still wanted to be doing in life, anyways. Yeah.
You don't have to every day think about, I have to put this practice to become more resilient, because otherwise it can be a bit more too clingy, and maybe it has the other way, the other effect.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Also here, someone who says, like, I feel like I am highly resilient, but it's done in a hard way. So I feel it's kind of like the same what we just were discussing. And she asked, like, how can I still be that resilient, but live it in a smooth and kind way? So maybe it's also about the other, like, don't put too much pressure on it for yourself.
Yeah, it's sort of connected to what we're, I think we're both doing these mindfulness sessions as well, right? And we're trying to practice a bit, not necessarily in a sort of spiritual way, but in a sort of practical way, how to become more gentle with ourselves as well. Because then, I was actually talking to a client this morning who said, I'm trying to meditate every morning and every evening, but it's not working for me, and then sort of, but you don't have to force it, right? So look into what works for you at that moment, instead of trying to force yourself into, I have to do this all day. I think whenever you feel like you have to do a lot of things, you're sort of missing the point.
And maybe also looking into what feels nice to build up resilience. We talked about positive emotions as well. It's actually a nice thing to also practice gratitude, focus on what's good in your life. That's also building resilience, and it's usually, nice to do. And so maybe try out some different techniques as well.
And it doesn't even have to take, like, it can be 1 minute a day.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. Let me think about another question that's here. Here's an interesting one, I guess. How can you prevent yourself from displacing your stress onto other people? While working from home, sometimes my partner and I are both getting stress, and it leads to tension.
Right. I think it's a very relatable one for many people.
Right? Yeah. If one feels stressed, the other feels it in the room as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe it starts off with that, sort of trying to acknowledge that this is happening, right? So I wouldn't necessarily advise you go to your partner and say, you look very stressed, honey. I don't think that's going to work. But maybe do the other way around, sort of explaining that this has been a very stressful day, and I may, and express your need there. Like every person deals differently with that. For instance, I would sometimes prefer not to be talking in detail about my stressful day. I just want to have some fun for a bit, right? Maybe at a different day, I want to actually be talking about that to deal with what was happening during today. But being able to be open and to express your basic need when it comes to stress there could actually help, instead of trying to guess what is it, where is your stress level now, and how can we deal with that. Ask that, right?
Yeah.
And maybe set the first step yourself, and so it becomes easy for the other person to share their own stress needs too.
Yeah.
And it's also okay to withdraw for a moment, to just focus on what you actually need. Because I feel, especially when there's stress and there's two stressed people, it can also help to just go maybe into a different room, take a few breaths, and see what you actually need right now.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's lovely. Actually, I was actually talking about that a lot. Now that most of the restrictions are gone, it's becoming less. But actually, about a lot of people sort of, at the end of the day, maybe it's good to go outside or do something else for a bit, because people were so used to, for a long time, having that time from work to home to deal with the day, and then come home, sort of ready for family life, for instance. And then people didn't have that anymore, and it's probably good to actually take that time to round off the day in a way for you as well, as you're saying.
Indeed, maybe just stay in your car for 10 minutes and go over your feelings. That could help.
Yeah, check in.
Another question is, how can you identify when you're suppressing emotions? What are the signs?
I think it's sort of a cliche thing to say, right? Sort of it differs per person, but in this case it really does.
But it does,
For some people it really sort of expresses itself in physical pain, sort of in your neck or in your shoulders, or you're starting to have all these physical complaints in your stomach, whatever it may be, right? And for other people, a common one is that they become more agitated towards other people, maybe connected to the example we just had. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why we've included that wheel of emotions here, is to check in often what are actually your signs, because every person has subtle ways in realizing that, oh, this is probably when I'm too stressed and when I'm maybe suppressing something that needs to be out there. And this is why I think it's important to check in with yourself, whether that be in the car, at the end of the day, during the day, at any time, taking a step back, reflecting, so what is actually happening right now? Because there's no handbook that's going to tell you this, there's no test available that's going to tell you this. It is really you creating that meaning of those signals.
Definitely, it's just, I think for this person, like if you want to identify how your suppressed emotions come out, just start with writing down every day what happened that day and how did you feel, what signs did your body give you, or maybe your mental state gave you, and then just discovering, go on this little adventure in yourself, in your own head, actually.
Maybe see where your thoughts go as well.
Yeah.
It's always the same thing and it's hard to disconnect. That may be a sign that there's something stressful there.
Yeah. Someone also asked, like, I love the wheel of emotions, finding an overwhelming lot on the internet about it. Would be great if Open Up writes a clear blog post on the best way how to use this wheel. So that's a good tip, and we will be definitely coming back to you with a nice blog post on that question. And there's actually one more question I would like to ask you guys. And it's a question we got sent in up front. And it's, how can I learn my kids to be more resilient? Are there like little tips to help your kids with?
I think one part definitely has to do with that reactions are okay. I think I mentioned it earlier in the presentation that a lot of us learn that some emotions shouldn't be too intense early in life, and that affects us later in life, and it makes it much more difficult to deal with those emotions later in life when they come up. So maybe look at, teach your kids that it's okay to feel the emotion, that we have a choice on how to react to them.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Help them being able to identify what is happening and then how to deal with that. And I like the choice aspect as well, because I feel like a lot of people haven't had that experience, that even though emotion is something that I feel we shouldn't deny, right? We can't, like whenever I'm really angry and I tell myself I'm not actually angry, it never seems to work, right? The anger is still there. I don't think denying works. I think it's the same when dealing with that with your kids, but then teaching them that you can actually feel angry and still do something else except being angry is a very helpful thing. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, guys, for the questions, the answers, the presentation. And I want to thank you guys for watching and staying with us. And I really hope you got the insights that you were looking for from this masterclass. And if not, remember, our psychologists are there for you. We recently also got a Russian-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking psychologist in our team. So if you're seeking for help in those languages, know that we're also there for you. And of course, in all the other languages that we're already serving. And I hope to see you next month at our next masterclass. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.